Rain lashed down, icy and relentless. John and Mark, caught in the unexpected storm, trudged along the deserted road. Dusk had fallen, shrouding the landscape in an eerie gloom. Desperation set in. They needed shelter, and fast. Look! Mark pointed to a silhouette in the distance, barely visible through the driving rain. A house. It loomed against the stormy sky, an imposing structure, dark and desolate. The iron gates hung open, victims of time and neglect. The crunch of gravel under their feet was the only sound as they approached. John tried the doorknob. To their surprise, it yielded, the door creaking open with a groan that echoed in the silence. Inside, the air hung heavy, thick with the smell of dampness and decay. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, exhaustion outweighed fear. They stepped inside, seeking refuge from the storm's fury. The meager light filtering through grimy windows revealed a once grand foyer, now faded and decaying. Cobwebs draped the ornate furniture like ghostly shrouds. Dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed for years. A massive, sweeping staircase dominated the hall, its darkness seeming to consume the meager light. Shadows danced in the flickering candlelight John had managed to light, taking on menacing forms. John shivered, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. "This place," he began, his voice barely a whisper. Mark, though visibly shaken, tried to sound optimistic. "It's just old, that's all. Come on, let's find somewhere dry." They explored further, each room an echo of past grandeur, now surrendered to decay and desolation. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the howling wind outside and the creaking of the old house settling around them. They finally settled in a room that seemed less oppressive than the others. A fireplace, though cold and damp, offered a glimmer of hope. As John struggled to coax a fire from the damp wood, a sound pierced the silence. It was faint at first, a rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere above. It seemed to emanate from the depths of the house, each thump resonating with an unnatural rhythm. "Did you hear that?" John whispered, his eyes darting towards the ceiling. Mark, lost in his own thoughts, barely reacted. "Probably just the wind," he mumbled, not sounding convinced himself. The sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It was no longer just a thump, it was a heavy thud, like footsteps pacing back and forth on the wooden floor above. Fear, cold and clammy, tightened its grip on John. He felt a tremor run through him, a primal instinct warning him of unseen danger. He looked at Mark, but his friend seemed oblivious, staring vacantly ahead. "Mark, we should leave," John urged, his voice tight with apprehension. "This place, there's something not right about this house." Mark didn't respond. He sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the staircase, a strange, detached expression on his face. The rhythmic thudding continued, relentless, hypnotic. John reached out to touch his friend's arm, but hesitated. There was something different about Mark, something unsettling in his stillness. Section 5. A trance-like state. Mark slowly rose to his feet, his eyes still glued to the staircase. He began moving towards it, drawn by an unseen force. "Mark, what are you doing?" John cried out, scrambling to his feet, reaching for his friend. Mark walked like a sleepwalker, his eyes vacant, his body rigid. He reached the foot of the stairs and began to climb, each step slow, deliberate, in sync with the rhythmic thudding. "Mark, come back!" John's voice echoed in the emptiness, but Mark didn't react. He continued upwards, disappearing into the darkness that seemed to cling to the staircase. The thudding stopped the moment Mark vanished into the shadows. Section 6. Blood in the Moonlight. John stood at the foot of the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest, torn between fear and concern for his friend. The silence was deafening now, heavier than before, pregnant with unseen menace. Then a new sound, a chilling metallic clang. It seemed to come from the top of the stairs, followed by a heavy thump. John's blood ran cold. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just as John's nerve was about to break, a figure emerged from the top of the stairs. It was Mark, but something was terribly wrong. He stood there, bathed in a sliver of moonlight that sliced through a gap in the boarded-up window. His eyes, wide and unblinking, stared ahead, devoid of recognition. In his hand he clutched a hatchet, its blade gleaming wetly in the darkness. Blood. Section 7. Escape. Terror, raw and primal, surged through John. He didn't need to see more. The blood, the vacant eyes, the unnatural stillness, it all pointed to a single, horrifying truth. He stumbled back, his foot catching on the edge of the rug. He fell, scrambling back in terror as Mark began to descend the stairs, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving John. John scrambled to his feet, adrenaline lending him strength. He didn't look back, didn't dare to. He flung himself against the front door, the old wood groaning in protest. It wouldn't budge. Panic welled up in his throat. He threw his weight against the door again and again, until, with a splintering crack, it burst open. Section 8. Dawn's Grim Light. John didn't stop running until he reached the main road. He collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for breath, the image of Mark, bathed in moonlight, the bloody hatchet in his hand, seared into his mind. He spent the rest of the night huddled under the meager shelter of a bus stop, his terror slowly giving way to a chilling certainty. Mark was gone. As dawn broke, casting a pale light on the rain-soaked landscape, John made his way to the nearest town. He went straight to the police, his words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and confusion. The police, though skeptical at first, were finally convinced by his genuine terror. A search party was organized. Section 9. The Search. They found Mark in the same room where John had last seen him, slumped against the wall, the hatchet still clutched in his hand. His eyes stared vacantly ahead, frozen in a mask of silent horror. The old house was thoroughly searched, but no trace of anyone else was found. There was no logical explanation for the blood, the hatchet, or the chilling transformation that had come over Mark. The official investigation remained inconclusive. The house, already shrouded in local legend, became a source of morbid fascination. Some whispered of an ancient evil, a presence that clung to the old house, preying on those unfortunate souls who dared to seek shelter within its decaying walls. Section 10. Unanswered Questions. John never fully recovered from that night. The image of Mark, his friend, standing on the stairs, bathed in moonlight, the bloody hatchet in his hand, haunted his dreams. He carried the weight of that night with him, the unanswered questions a constant torment. What had happened to Mark in that old house? What dark force had taken hold of his friend, twisting him into something monstrous? The old house stood silent, a grim silhouette against the ever-changing sky. Its secrets locked within its decaying walls, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the shadows of the human heart and the unseen forces that whisper in the night.